Welcome to the Week 5 FanDuel and DraftKings Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay, taking a look at a position-by-position approach for this week, talking plays, lineup construction, fades, all that. You and I, salary expectation, we were kind of like, oh, this is a gross week, but it's slowly, we're warming up to a little bit.
It is a gross week, but as you get closer into the evaluation of the slate, you kind of see the directions you're going to go in. You're like, okay, I know who I'm getting my exposure to. This is going to be how this goes. Interesting weekend of football, to say the least. I think this is a week where we see some pendulum swings for some teams, back to previous seasons. Maybe the Giants get a win. I think the Ravens have a chance to look a little better. But overall, I think it's going to be a very ugly but potentially fun week.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's just jump into it. Let's get into quarterbacks here. There's Aaron Rodgers up top. Like, he's the pay up option. And then we get like a huge drop off. I mean, how much Aaron Rodgers exposure do you plan on having?
So I love the way salaries have gone for quarterbacks this year, because I still love paying up, because I think you just get lower ownership on guys that are sure things. Now, obviously, it doesn't always work out. Last week, we had quite a few, lower end quarterbacks hit, and that was a problem. Brady, all those, that game flow didn't quite work out well. But, some weeks Rodgers and Brady are going to score 35 points. And then no matter anyone else played, it won't matter. And I mean, if they're going to continue to get good matchups and be priced up like this, that keeps their ownership down, especially on FanDuel, obviously. I'm going to continue to play them. Not full exposure, but I do think you should continue to get shares and game stack those games for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Dallas and you look at Green Bay, that's essentially the Sunday night game over on DraftKings. That's kind of the game I think a lot of people will be looking to target, both those high totals. Dallas is actually favored in that one, which was kind of shocking to me. But when you look at Rodgers, I mean, when you look at Dallas, I mean, fourth most passing touchdowns allowed. This secondary, not very good. Rodgers, 300-plus yards in 3 or 4 games this year, 7 touchdowns over the last 2. I mean, there's that potential for 250-plus yards, 4 touchdowns this week. And I especially think that if Montgomery doesn't play, that it adds to the basically the ceiling of Rodgers this week.
Absolutely. And there's always the chance he could get game flowed with Zeke and the running game. But, Aaron Rodgers doesn't, even if it's late in the game, I have faith, that he could score 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter or something goofy. So even with game flow, you're not too worried about Rodgers' floor. I think you're looking at, 20 to 22 minimum on DK. And with that upside in the 30 to 35 range. So I'm pretty confident in that play, even at 8K.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. So let's get off into kind of these secondary guys. It's not a lot of ideal matchups. Jacksonville's been very good. Roethlisberger, Seattle, you and I talked about that. It's always tricky when they go and play the Rams. They just tend to struggle. Newton on the road against Detroit. I mean, where are you kind of going in this mid-range?
Well, I think Wilson's a clear good play. I think there's definitely shootout potential in that game. And if not, I mean, we'll see how the Rams it's all about how the Rams offense reacts to the Seattle defense. Obviously, they've played well the first few weeks against some okay defenses. But generally speaking, this is going to be the best defensive they've faced so far, even with the Seahawks being on the road. So I think this is going to be a fun game to watch. Wilson definitely has the most upside of the second-tier guys. I don't love Cam Newton. I think last week was just more about the Patriots' defense than Cam Newton being back. He's still, if we remember the first 3 weeks, it was very ugly. They're still not running him as much. I do like a few players on his offense, but I don't like him. Wentz is okay. People seem to be more on him than I am. And I like Dak. I think he's a pretty solid play overall, especially like stacking him with Dez. I guess we can talk about Dez now. Where are you at with him?
I love Dez. I love the Dez Prescott stack. I stack Prescott's my favorite option in this middle range. Just when you look, I mean, he gets you about 2.5 to 3 fantasy points in terms of just rushing alone. Has that rushing potential in terms of the touchdown upside. He's had some tough matchups to open up the year: Giants, Denver, Arizona, and that kind of pairs well with Dez in particular, where Dez saw Patrick Peterson, Janoris Jenkins, Roby for Denver. I mean, they're tough spots for him. I think when people kind of look, they're like, oh, he's super inefficient this year, even though his targets are up. But he's had really tough spots. Like, things are going to open up. He's 10th. He's 4th in total targets among wide receivers. So I mean, open it up. Give me some Dez. I don't feel like he's really overpriced. I think on FanDuel, I mean, he's 7,800. But when you look at DraftKings, I mean, you got dropped at 6,600. Like, he's just outside the top 10 in terms of wide receivers, and I like that stack. I don't think there's really anyone else outside of the main 3 young Dallas that you really should be using this week.
There's a lot of Dez isn't an elite receiver anymore going around right now, and I love every part of that. Dez Bryant is very much an elite receiver still. It's just a very different situation than it was with Tony Romo. He's getting a lot of targets so far. We'll see how Dak sort of transforms in year 2, but he's still very much an alpha for an NFL offense. So there's potential for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns every week with him, even, in a less than matchup. So I think this is a great matchup for him. And I could see him having his best game of the season here.
Yeah, I definitely could as well. Anyone else in that mid-range? Like, I'm intrigued with Eli Manning, where he's in the mid-range on DraftKings, but he's super cheap on FanDuel. Like, I like him a lot at home this week, and he's been quietly back up into what we talked about Eli Manning before the show, I think last week or last show, but he's 5th in yardage, 1st in completions. Like, they're airing it out a ton because the New York run game has just been non-existent for how many years now?
Yeah, Sterling Shepard and Brandon Marshall are basically their run game, along with Evan Ingram, just the short passing game. So love that for Eli. Like the matchup. I think he's a great play. I think he kind of overrules a lot of players in this tier. You got to make some choices if you're not building 500 lineups. So Eli's probably going to be my choice over Carson Palmer and Rivers. I like JJ Nelson. I like Keenan Allen. I think that's going to be the way I go, getting exposure to those guys. I like Andre Ellington. So I think I'm just going to go with Eli in this tier and then kind of get exposure to the quarterbacks around him through the skill position players.
And as far as cheap guys go, like, there's 3 to 4 cheap guys on DraftKings, I think, especially that we're keying in on, because Eli's $7K on FanDuel. I think that's a pretty significant difference from over on DraftKings, because when you look at things, I mean, Eli, McCown's $200 cheaper, Cutler's $300 cheaper, Hoyer's $5. But when we look over on DraftKings, I mean, we get a big $1,000, $1,500 difference. You and I mean, Miami's been awful. They've been bad. They've been horrendous. Cutler's been bad. If we look at how bad they've been, if we took that out the window, this is a terrific matchup for them at home to get back going. And I kind of like the Cutler Landry Parker stack because it's cheap. I think there's some reasonable upside here in this matchup.
Yeah, and so if you want to talk about that tier, I kind of look at Hoyer and Flacco as better plays for 500 cheaper on DK. That's kind of how I'm playing that. But I like Cutler this week again, and I don't care. Like, it's just what I'm going to be doing again. I'm not going to get a ton of exposure, but I will have lineups. I don't necessarily like Landry as much. I kind of like Parker, hoping for a deep ball because this is not a healthy offense right now. I think we go with Cutler, Parker, and then, you like Landry, that's fine with me. But I just prefer getting Parker exposure. And generally speaking, I'm going to get Parker exposure instead of playing Cutler for the most part. Kenny Stills, I mean, I'm just like, what's the potential breakdown of a Jay Cutler good game? We looking at 16 to 18 DK points as his ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, I think his ceiling is realistic. Like, if they're not going to run Jay Ajayi, which I think these two teams, like, they should be running the ball, and I think this week they really should be, but they're not. But when you look at things like Cutler is not, there's a 200 to 250 yardage game here, and there's 2 to 3 touchdowns to be had. And like you said, I mean, I think Parker's the clear play. I like Parker a lot over on FanDuel. I like him on DraftKings because I feel like he is priced up in terms of being in that range. And the reason I like Nelson or Landry so much is because he's about $1,000 cheaper than Parker on DK. And we know Landry. I mean, this is a guy who's going to catch 6+ receptions. He's going to see 8 to 12 targets. So I think when you get that at 5,800, you got to be looking at it, because when you look at that range, I don't like Jeffrey this week. I don't like Cooper. Rashard Matthews, Tyrell Williams is priced up. Like when you look at that tier, it's not good. Like,
yeah, and with Adams hurt, it's a really we're not going to get into that.
That's a gross 5K range on DraftKings for wide receivers. It's really gross.
It is something I want to avoid. I could see John Brown. He looked healthy last week, almost made a game-winning catch. I could see playing him for sure. Another guy to get exposure to Carson Palmer. But yeah, I kind of like diving down instead of staying in that 5K range. I think you can go with Funchess again. But like you mentioned, Landry is a solid play in that tier. Anyone else? I mean, I know Trubisky's $20 on Yahoo. I know you mentioned Brissett, 22. I think I'll be getting some Trubisky exposure, but with some of these other cheap options, probably not as much as I initially planned.
Yeah, I think when you kind of look at things in the lower end and where guys are at, I'm limiting myself to those guys. I mean, you can get a Hoyer share. Like you're on Flacco. I'm not really on Flacco this week. I think those sub 5K guys are definitely intriguing, especially because of Bell being kind of the chalk play that you just kind of plug in this week. So I think it creates a different lineup structure. I think we're focusing a little bit more on the mid-range and cheaper options while maybe getting some exposure to Rodgers up top of that. I think that Rodgers thing, that changes your lineup construction.
Absolutely. Running back.
Back, because there's one to use this week.
Le'Veon, we got Elliott, Todd Gurley, and then a fairly significant drop-off. I love Fournette again this week at 7K. I think that's a borderline cash play with price considered. But what are you doing with that top tier?
Well, it's Bell and log out. Obviously, if you want to hedge a couple of lineups and get them just because of the flukiness that can happen in the NFL, sure, go that route. But for me, I mean, he's going to be a staple for mine and basically a lot of people's lineups. When you look at things, Jacksonville's been bottom 3 rush defense. He's getting 30+ touches a game. He's had 22 targets in the passing game. Finally broke off against Baltimore. He's far and above, I think, really the next guy, because he's Le'Veon Bell at home, and Jacksonville's really funneling everything to the run because of those cornerbacks.
Zeke is a pretty decent play and nice leverage on Bell. I could see that Dallas game being a shootout, and I could definitely see him paying off that 8,800 price tag. You can play both. I mean, honestly, with some of the cheap wide receivers and quarterbacks, you can fit in the top 3 running backs. It's just it's ugly to look at, but it could definitely work, especially in cash. I mean, I don't think it's too daring to go Bell, Elliott, Gurley, even in a cash game setting.
No, I don't either. Like when you look at things, I mean, especially now because Gurley and Zeke are kind of getting Bell-like work in the passing game, and that's given them a bump on their floor. Like, Zeke had the touchdown last week through the air. He's had a couple of decent games. He's getting about 4 to 5 targets. They talked about that at the beginning of the year. That's happening. Gurley is as well. Gurley's freaking, all of a sudden he's looking like Le'Veon Bell alone just in terms of his production and touches right now. So, I
mean, let's be honest, he's looking better than Le'Veon Bell.
He has. I mean, 7 touchdowns. The Seattle defense has really struggled against the run too. Like, they've been bad. I mean, 6th most rushing yards allowed this year, 134 per game, 5.1 yards per carry. I don't know what's going on with the Seattle defense, especially given the fact that, it's always been their strength. And I think at home, Gurley is still a solid play, even with Seattle being on the other side.
So, and I think that's enough on the top tier guys. I think it's pretty straightforward. They're all great plays. Leonard Fournette, I know people thought heading into the year he was just going to be pounded up the middle 20 times and no receptions, looking like he's going to be getting 3 to 4 receptions a week, which is huge on DK. Not really that big of a deal on FanDuel. But, that upside's pretty nice. Almost had 2 receiving touchdowns last week. We can thank Aurelius Ben for not having the second one. But, I know I kind of put my take out there. What do you think of him? Pittsburgh at home, always scary. Are you a little less bullish on him than I am?
I think he's a good play. Like I said, I think the upside is still there. I still think the usage is there, especially because the passing game work, like you said. But I mean, I think he needs the touchdown. He really does need the touchdown. If that touchdown doesn't come, he's had one in each game this year. But if that doesn't come, you're really hurting at that price, I think.
Absolutely. All right, let's play a game. Pick one running back from 5K to 6,500 that you love.
5K to 6,500. I'm going to stick by my guy here and talk to Marco Murray. I am. Okay. Miami's rush defense, they're good. They're not bad. It's not a matchup play. Murray has certainly not seen heavy attempts this year. Derrick Henry's, chipped into a little bit of the workload. They've been kind of a more balanced / running with Mariota more. I think without Mariota likely this week, I expect them to run on the game or possibly lean on the run game a little bit more. Murray's a terrific GPP guy. He's not a cash game guy. I think he's a solid GPP guy. I think there's a lot of GPP guys in this range because it's ugly. Melvin Gordon, the matchup's ugly. He's on the road. He hasn't done much this year. It's ugly. Bilal Powell, people might be chasing that recency bias. I can kind of get it, but Cleveland's actually been really good against the run this year. So I think Murray's the guy I'm kind of going to be leaning on maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all those takes. As much as I love Melvin, I think he's really scary in terms of being a fantasy asset right now just because he's hurt and they're still playing him, but he's clearly hurt and they clearly know that. They're getting other guys snaps, especially at the end of that game. He obviously left for a little while. It's just a mess, and they're not dealing with their young feature back like the way you should. He should be sitting out the next 2 or 3 weeks and coming back when he feels better. But they're not going to do that, so he's an avoid until further notice. I like Christian McCaffrey this week. Obviously hasn't looked great in the run game so far this year, but he hasn't had less than 5 targets in a game. Detroit always been a little susceptible to sort of backs out of the backfield here. And, I think Carolina's going to be back to being bad. I think this could be an ugly game, and I think we could see a lot of Christian McCaffrey sort of dump offs when nobody else is open. Obviously, Slay gonna lock down Kelvin. I don't have much faith in Funchess, even though I think he's a decent play. So there aren't really many options to go to in that passing game. So I definitely think he's a great tournament play. Obviously not in cash, but definitely a nice tournament play.
Yeah, so you mentioned that on DK, kind of that range. I think that's because FanDuel, like, you're looking to pay up at those options. Like it's a little bit easier to go. Yes. I think this range on DraftKings is a little bit more useful because your lineup construction has to focus in on them a little bit more. So I definitely don't mind. I think there's a lot of intriguing options in that range. Let's dive down to basically the PPR guys that we are going to key in on this week. Duke Johnson leads the team in targets, receptions, and receiving yards over the last 3 weeks. He's first in ADOT in terms of running backs playing over 50% of the snaps. This is a guy who's going to be used. You mentioned he's always been this guy. He just hasn't been used.
Yeah, he's always been this guy in the NFL, and this is what he profiled as, a college back as well. He was always prolific in the passing game, was a prolific runner at Miami, tested out pretty good, at the combine, 3rd round. Overall, really great prospect, better than Crowell in pretty much every way. So the fact that they're giving him this role now is awesome. 4,900, such a cheap deal for what you're potentially getting in this role. I think we've seen enough of a 2-week sample to trust this. Kaiser's going to be in there, and it's going to be a struggle. He's found his best weapon. They're still signing guys off the street for wide receivers, so he is the constant guy in that offense. Yeah, Njoku or whatever will catch touchdowns every once in a while, but Duke Johnson's the main weapon in that offense, and he will going forward. If you had to choose between Wendell Smallwood and Andre Ellington, who are you taking?
I think Ellington here. I just think because they'll be down. Like, I think there's just more of a games. I like Smallwood. You know, I think he's intriguing. I think, Philly on a whole is intriguing this week. But I think Ellington, I mean, when you look since David Johnson's gone down, he's seen 22 targets. He's caught 14 of them. Philly's 21st in DVOA against pass catching backs. Ellington's right behind Duke Johnson in terms of average depth of target. So, I mean, I think Ellington's an intriguing option. I wasn't looking at Johnson last week. I've been kind of late to the train on him, but I don't mind these two guys, I think, in terms of a flex spot or an RB2 because they're essentially just wide receivers and good PPR wide receivers.
Absolutely. So no on FanDuel, but definitely rock them on DK.
Is there anyone you liked on FanDuel in the mid-range? Like, were you
I like McCaffrey. I know it sounds crazy, but he's a really good player. He's been a little hesitant to start the year, but he's going to keep that role. I think he's a really good player. So,
so let's wrap up running backs real quick. Do you have any interest in basically kind of the injury situations and guys filling in for?
No, all these guys that are getting propped up right now are just not. McKissick was an all-purpose slot receiver at Arkansas State. And I talked about him the week before. They mentioned they were going to get him some passing work with Procise out. Procise is a guy I like if he plays. McKissick, Elijah McGuire. I
have no interest in the Green Bay guys.
Bay guys. What do we think? I was talking about this with John Proctor, who does a great job at the DFS Power Hour. What do we think? Ripkowski's just not going to be on the field stealing those goal line touches, and Randall Cobb's not going to be, running out of the backfield on certain plays. Like, even if he gets 60% of the snaps, what does that even mean? The Packers have been doing this to us for 7 years. Have we not learned our lesson yet?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. They're not in play for me.
No.
So I have some interest in Rawls this week.
I get it. I get it. I'm not going to be there, but I get it.
And I like that. I like that people are sick of trying to dive into the Seattle committee. It's been a 4 to 5 running back.
Oh, no, they're not. No, they love it. They love these.
I don't think Rawls will be high on them.
Oh, they love those undrafted free agents that score 1 touchdown. They love them.
He's not going to be
Chris Carson, the next Adrian Peterson.
Okay, but people like Carson.
Chris Carson.
But people are not going to go that route this week.
Oh, Chris Carson, he is a stud.
All right, Russ, let's slow down.
All right, sorry.
But it's a good matchup. Rams have been awful against the run. They've been horrible.
Yeah,
straight up bad.
I think you could play Procise. I think you can do certain things like that. But I get Rawls. I'm not going to be doing it.
That's fine. All right. Running backs wrapped up. Let's move on to wide receivers. This is an interesting week because, one, you got basically Antonio Brown taking on Jalen Ramsey. You got A.J. Green against Buffalo. OBJ a little bit banged up with multiple injuries. Some of these top-tier guys have a couple red flags against them.
I like OBJ, even hurt. He's still stumbling around out there, and it's fine. He's just going to figure it out. He's the best wide receiver of this generation, and you just play him. If Randy Moss was dinged up, I'd still play him. Still going to play OBJ. Antonio Brown and AJ Green, however, I don't love as much. I still think you can play AJ Green. But in terms of Pittsburgh, I'm going Bell, Martavis Bryant, maybe even Juju Smith-Schuster at 35. And he's pretty cheap on FanDuel as well. I think he could see another few red zone targets, which – I mean, he's a very good player. So it's not like luck that he's converting these into touchdowns. That's just he's a very good player. So Martavis Baum, no AB this week for me.
Yeah, he's a guy I'll have a share or two of. I think Green as well, just because you kind of feel the need to get those shares because I don't think matchup. They still have potential in any matchup to absolutely go off. I like Jordy Nelson this week quite a bit. He's actually, coming off back-to-back 2-touchdown games. I'm kind of waiting for the big breakout where he actually scores 100-plus yards and, still gets the touchdown or two. It's coming.
Well,
this
I
spot
mean,
this spot is good for him because Dallas secondary meh at best.
you don't consider back-to-back 2 touchdown games the breakout.
Oh no, I mean obviously huge.
I know
No,
what you're saying,
like
but
you know what I mean, like the huge yardage game. Like
he's
it's not.
so frustrating and season long to play against. Like
He's money.
teams just he's scored like 700 touchdowns in the last 7 years, and teams just refuse to cover him in the red zone. It's amazing, and it's going to continue because it's Aaron Rodgers, and he gets those offside penalties and just shoots YOLO balls to Jordy. So yeah, no, I totally agree. You mentioned this early in the week. I think he's a great play again. Yeah, back-to-back 2 touchdown games, but that doesn't necessarily mean regression this week in a good matchup.
No.
So that next tier down, it's pretty steep drop off on DK. Keenan Allen, Doug Baldwin, Fitzgerald, Cobb, Parker. What are you looking at in that group?
Um, it's Des Bryant for the most part. I like Parker. I don't mind Cobb. I like Cobb if Adams is out. The Green Bay situation is just completely. We're gonna have to wait until the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
The guys I'm off of, I don't like Keenan Allen this week. I think you touched on him a little bit before. I don't like the matchup against the secondary. Janoris Jenkins has done a tremendous job if he follows him around on limiting wide receiver ones. And I just don't like Rivers all the way on the East Coast. I don't like that offense on the East Coast. I think the Giants are actually a playable defense this week, even though they've been a little bit weak so far.
Yep, I like Parker. We mentioned him. I like Dez. We already talked about him. Doug Baldwin, always that sneaky GPP guy. Obviously a little banged up right now, but I feel like he loves this matchup. Should be pretty exploitable for him. Always a good GPP play, not someone I'm going to be getting a ton of exposure to. Anyone else in that?
We can move down to like those.
Yeah.
There's so many names here where it's like, Jesus, I'm paying $6K for this guy. I'm paying $5,800 for this guy. Like, I don't want to. I think TY is interesting this week. Like we talked about, against Cleveland, there's going to be certain matchups to use him. Andrew Luck's close to coming back and making this offense somewhat more usable. But Brissett's helped. I mean, he really has. And I think Hilton at home here, he's certainly a solid play. Golden Tate this week, what are your thoughts on him? Down week in 2 of the last 3, but I think that was more matchup dependent. I still don't think it's a great matchup, but I think it's better than the previous couple.
Oh yeah, I like Tate. He'll be able to sneak through this Carolina defense. I like him quite a bit. I think he's a potential cash play, which I think I'm going to be pretty contrarian with that take. But he's kind of like the guy in that offense, especially with Ebron sort of falling into the back here. Marvin Jones always picking up the number 1 outside corner, which sucks for him, but that's just the way things have seemed to roll this year. Golladay not healthy. So I just think when it comes down to it, Stafford knows who his reliable guy is. So I do like him. I think you can take shots with Alshon, kind of, but not really. That's a bad take. Don't take any shots with Alshon. He's got Patrick Peterson. Nelson Aguilar instead of Jeffrey. Ertz instead of Jeffrey. Just not Alshon Jeffrey. I shouldn't have brought him up. Funchess. I think you can play him again, even at 5,600 on DK. Kelvin is okay. I don't like Cam, but I think you can play some of his weapons.
Yeah, I don't mind Funchess. Targeted over 25% of his routes over the last 2 weeks. He's clearly had a role with Olsen being down. Yeah, I definitely don't mind him. I feel like he's overpriced, but I think still usable. I feel like a lot of these guys are probably overpriced in this range. I think a lot of that range I'm not going to be touching on FanDuel. Mm-hmm. We have Randall Cobb, we have Devontae Parker, we have those guys over on FanDuel where they're Fitzgerald 6,700, still Tate 6,700. Like we're getting those big names in the 6,700 range on FanDuel where you can just continue to plug them in. Like you can use them as wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s. That's why we don't need to dive down so much there.
They finally priced up Paul Richardson, so I don't have to play him this week, which I'm very thankful for. Every time he was 4K or below, it was like, all right, got to line him up again for my 10 points. But, yeah, no, I like that. I guess let's talk about some cheaper guys maybe.
Yeah, let's talk punts and true punts. Do you like any of the Jacksonville guys just in terms of garbage time?
No, I'm not doing. I'm not
Not
doing
doing
that
it.
this week. I get it. It's one of those where I get it. I'm not going to be doing it, but I get it. Type of deals. Are you looking at one of them?
Hearns is somewhat intriguing.
Mm.
I think outside of that, yeah, not much. But yeah, I think when we look at this range here, you brought up Jeremy Maclin, who is
Hmm.
extremely underpriced. He's been very quiet because basically Baltimore's been horrendous through
Terrible.
the first few weeks. So I think
Hmm.
I completely glossed over him. So you're the one who brought him up to me.
Yeah, I just think he's still the alpha in that offense. Obviously, they've struggled, had that weird London game. And obviously, that was Ramsey on him. So that was going to be ugly from the start. I just think his price is so cheap for the quality of player he is. I get that Oakland is a decent defense, but they've definitely been exposed more than once this year. With EJ Manuel at quarterback, there's a chance this team gives up. And I mean, gives up pretty early in the year. No Crabtree potentially. Cooper not looking so great right now. Going to be a tough matchup for their offense. So we're going to be seeing them in some potentially great positions early in the game. So I think this could be a Macklin game, kind of like he had that, stretch of touchdowns early in the year. I think we could see, that 30-yard passing touchdown from Flacco this week, and I'd bet it's to Macklin.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. If Marquise Goodwin's out, I do like Aldrick Robinson.
Mm,
12
yep.
targets with Goodwin out last week. Colts 24th against wide receiver twos and DVOA, allowed the ninth most points. They're giving up monster plays, and Hoyer has not been afraid to take shots to Goodwin this year, and I don't think he will be afraid. Obviously, he wasn't last week to Robinson. So, especially if the Colts can get out to a little bit of a lead here at home, I think that helps out Robinson. When you look at his price tag, I think he's worth a look as a wide receiver 3. And the same thing goes for Nelson Aguilar. We talked about him on salary exploitation because basically, as you mentioned, Patrick Peterson taking away Alshon Jeffrey helps free up some other guys and some more targets elsewhere.
I think I'm off Torrey Smith until further notice too. I thought he was a
Until he
great GP.
retires.
Yeah, I thought he was a great GPP play early in the year, but we're just not seeing it. So Aguilar's kind of been the guy who's gotten the deep plays so far this year. And I'll mention my one gross guy of the week, which is, if Crabtree doesn't play, we did see Cordero Patterson get 6 targets and catch all 6 passes last week. Always the chance that he could break a big one, blah, blah, blah. He's 3,100. Aldrich's clearly the superior play, but if you're going all in on running back and you want to get maybe OBJ in there, you can do it.
Yeah, you talked to Juju Smith-Schuster as well. He's down here at
Yeah.
3,500. Like I said, I mean, you can use these guys on FanDuel as a deep threat, as a one-off as your wide receiver 3. If you're building out both running backs or building up both quarterback, we're not knocking those guys on FanDuel. They're just not as needed.
Right, exactly.
So, anyone else a wide receiver?
No, not really.
Let's move to tight end here. No Travis Kelce, no Gronk on DK. Kelsey's available on FanDuel. Zach Ertz, I mean, he's basically kind of established himself as the guy this year. He's caught 26 to 32 targets, third in points per snap among tight ends. I just kind of look at him and go, if you have the luxury of paying up a tight end, it just kind of makes sense. I know Arizona's been that tough matchup throughout the last few years against tight ends and have really limited damage, but I think Ertz is still very usable here.
If you're not paying up, and we kind of talked about Delaney being a consistent guy even without Mariota in the lineup, his splits are honestly relatively the same. I think you just go straight up to Ertz. I don't trust Graham. I don't like the matchup for Charles Clay. Cincinnati shut down tight end this year. I don't think they've played a ton of great tight ends, but I mean, there's just nothing so far this year. So might be a tough matchup for Buffalo. And other than that, Olsen on IR, Witten non-existent, and then you kind of get into the range where they're playable again. But from 4 to 6, I mean, or I'll say from 45 to 6, there's really nobody else to play if you want to pay up.
No, and the thing is, like, I'll have some Ertz exposure. I just don't think my lineup construction is going to allow me to have a lot of Ertz exposure.
Mhm.
I like ASJ this week against Cleveland. Cleveland's been god awful against tight ends, against bad tight ends too. Tyler Croft, Jesse James, Ben Watson all put up monster games, and ASJ is far more talented than those three guys. So I like him. Evan Ingram's going to be a guy I think I use. I think between those two, I like quite a bit here. Ingram, in this matchup here, I mean, he's tied for second targets among tight ends. Heavy pass volume from this Giants offense. He's been, a strong tight end on a week-to-week basis. I know he's not doing a lot, but that's just because tight ends been relatively weak outside of a few names here.
Yep, I like him in that range. I like Jared Cook. And then if you go down, like there's just a lot of guys you can't play right now. You can't play Eric Ebron. Jack Doyle probably not going to play. Eifert probably not going to play. Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry, I just don't think you can play right now.
It's such a good matchup for both those guys.
It's brutal, man. It's brutal. Jesse James, I think Juju's kind of taking a lot of the tight end targets there. So worried about that. And I just think it's pretty straightforward this week. ASJ, Ben Watson, Cook, Ingram, or what do you think about Martellus Bennett? I guess he's the guy we can talk about.
I don't mind him. There's been some grumblings about them trying to get him started early on in this game. I'm not buying a whole lot into it. I think he's an intriguing option, especially if Adams is out, which I was thinking early in the week he'd be out, but it looks like he's kind of making a little bit of a comeback. So I don't mind Bennett. I think he's an intriguing option if you want to be basically on what's probably going to be one of the highest scoring games of the week.
Definitely.
So, defense, this is going to be a fun conversation because I don't feel there's an elite defense this week. I know Steelers have Jacksonville and Blake Bortles at home. I'm not paying up for him. That's the thing.
There's an old wives' tale. Anyway, there's an old myth out there that when there's a man named EJ Manuel, when he is the starting quarterback, you play the opposing defense. And I'm going to be abiding by that methodology this week. Ravens D, hammer Ravens. Ravens D, and that's going to be the way I do this week. I'm going to probably have 40 to 50% exposure to them. I think the Bills are a really good play. Eagles in play at home always, because I don't know why they play so much better at home, but they always make big plays at home. Bengals, 49ers, Lions. And that's those are the groups that I'm going to be looking at. What are your takes on those teams, I guess, and would you add anybody else?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's kind of a tale of two sides here. I like the Giants on FanDuel. I don't like them on DraftKings where they're 36. I like the Ravens call. I like the Eagles call. I don't feel they're all that expensive. I can see a defense in that Colts San Francisco game having some sort of impact. I don't know if the upside's going to be there. I see them kind of getting bailed out by maybe a pick six or something along those lines. I like the Lions. When is the defensive touchdown dance going to end, though? But, I mean, even last week, I still feel like they were still strong. And if they're going to continue to play this ground and pound game, Detroit's defense is damn good. So I do like them as well. I like the Eagles. I like Buffalo. The only one I didn't like the Bengals. I mentioned to you before, just solely because Tyrod Taylor doesn't turn the ball over. They play a slow style where they don't allow a ton of upside to defenses.
I guess my question is, and this is going with the logic that the Bengals are good against tight end, if they shut Charles Clay down, how are they going to pass the ball?
Yeah, there's no Jordan Matthews. They haven't used Zay Jones.
They're using Zay Jones as – I heard he had a really high ADOT. That's not – you don't want Zay Jones running deep routes. That's not what you want there. So I just don't know where they're going to pass the ball.
It's going to be dump off to McCoy. It's going to be
Andre Holmes, maybe. I don't know. So I'm worried. Bengals have a pretty good run D as well. So
That game's going to be 12-9.
I think that's the best take here. That's going to be an ugly game. And like you mentioned, though, Tyrod doesn't turn it over much. So that's definitely a downside to the Bengals for sure.
Yeah, I think that's going to wrap things up for us. Any final thoughts here on week 5?
Gonna be an ugly one, but should be a fun one. I think there's some interesting games to target, and I don't know. Do your Hail Marys before this week.
This is a week. We've talked some ugly names. We've talked some names that would not make it on the pod in future weeks or prior weeks. So this is it. It's one of those weeks. Take your chances, because I think outside of a few guys, ownership's going to be rather spread out, rather low for most players this week. So I think that's what's going to be fun about this week, and why we kind of like it, maybe more than others. Mm-hmm. So let's wrap it up with us. You can head on over to DaveFantasyCafe.com. Optimizer is up and running for all the sports that are going on. Content and cheat sheets will be rolling out throughout the week as well. And once again, if you like what we're doing here, give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. And good luck in week 5.